Imagine this: you walk into a lively gathering, a place where voices overlap in endless chatter, where laughter fills the air, and where people seem to be completely absorbed in their social exchanges. There are smiles, handshakes, and animated conversations. It is a scene that many would describe as the essence of human connection, an event where people strengthen their social bonds and indulge in what they believe to be meaningful relationships. Now shift your focus to a lone figure standing at the periphery. They are not anxious, nor do they appear awkward or lonely. Instead, they seem completely indifferent to the entire spectacle before them. They are lost in thought, their mind occupied with something far more compelling than small talk and pleasantries. While others engage in light-hearted banter, this individual remains detached, uninterested in trivial conversations, uninterested in the energy that seems to captivate the rest of the crowd. Why do intelligent people often seem disengaged from social life? Is it arrogance, introversion, or something much deeper? Could it be that intelligence naturally leads to a preference for solitude? And if so, why? Today we will explore the profound insights of Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brilliant and unconventional philosophers of the 19th century. His perspectives on intelligence and social life challenge everything we have been conditioned to believe, and by the end of this video you will understand why highly intelligent individuals often find little to no value in social interactions. The final revelation will be the most profound of all, one that may change the way you view your own relationships forever. Schopenhauer argued that intelligence and solitude are deeply intertwined. The more intelligent a person is, the less they feel the need to rely on social interaction for stimulation or validation. This is because their minds are naturally rich with thoughts, ideas, and internal dialogue that make external distractions unnecessary. In his seminal work, The World is Will and Representation, he explains that the average person seeks company because their mind is empty when left alone, whereas highly intelligent individuals possess an internal world so vast that solitude becomes a source of pleasure rather than loneliness. This raises an important question: is social interaction truly necessary for happiness? Or is it simply something we have been taught to believe from childhood? We are told that making friends, being sociable, and engaging with others are essential to our well being. We are led to believe that those who prefer solitude are somehow missing out on life. Yet history tells a different story. Some of the most brilliant minds, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, Emily Dickinson, Franz Kafka, and even Schopenhauer himself, chose to distance themselves from the noise of society. Were they miserable, or did they simply understand something that most people don't show? Open power source, socializing not as an inherent human need but as a means of escape for those who lack depth. He believed that people who crave constant interaction do so because they cannot bear the silence of their own minds. To him, the majority of conversations are filled with trivialities, gossip, and meaningless exchanges that serve no real intellectual or personal purpose. In contrast, the intelligent person is self sufficient. They do not seek companionship out of necessity, but rather choose it selectively when and if it serves a higher purpose. But let's take a moment to reflect. Have you ever found yourself feeling drained after social interactions? Have you ever noticed that while others seem to thrive on socializing, you often feel exhausted, as if your energy is being depleted rather than replenished? If so, you are not alone. Many highly intelligent individuals report feeling detached from traditional social structures, not because they dislike people, but because they see through the illusion of social necessity. Now, some might argue that humans are social creatures by nature, that we evolve to depend on groups for survival and emotional well being. And this is true to an extent, but Schopenhauer had a different perspective. He believed that while social structures are useful for practical matters such as trade, cooperation, and external survival, they do not necessarily lead to internal fulfillment. In fact, he argued that excessive socializing is often a distraction from true personal growth. He compared people to empty vessels. Those with little intellectual depth require external input, conversations, entertainment, social validation to feel complete. But those with rich inner worlds do not need these distractions. Their thoughts, ideas, and creativity provide them with an endless source of engagement, making solitude not only desirable but essential for their intellectual and emotional well being. This idea challenges one of the deepest assumptions of modern society, that being social is an inherent virtue, but is it? Or is it simply a way to avoid the discomfort of being alone with one's own thoughts? Schopenhauer also saw another problem with social life, one that intelligent individuals quickly recognize in social interactions. There is an inevitable element of conformity. It's people engage in predictable discussions, follow social norms, and suppress their true selves in order to fit in. Highly intelligent individuals, on the other hand, are often unwilling to do this. They prefer authenticity over acceptance, depth over superficiality, and truth over politeness. This refusal to conform makes them outliers, people who do not fit neatly into the mold of traditional social expectations. This explains why so many brilliant thinkers have been misunderstood, isolated, or even labeled as difficult or antisocial. It is not that they despise society, but rather that they see through its illusions. They recognize that much of what people call connection is often just a series of scripted interactions driven more by habit than by true meaning. But here's the real question: if intelligent people naturally gravitate towards solitude, does this mean that social life has no value for them? Or is there a way for them to engage with society in a way that is meaningful and fulfilling? This is where Schopenhauer's most powerful insight comes in, one that we will explore in depth as we continue. And the final revelation will be the most transformative of all. Schopenhauer's insights challenge everything we assume about the value of social life. If highly intelligent individuals do not feel the need to be constantly surrounded by others, then what truly drives their detachment? Is it simply a preference? Or is there a deeper reason why social interactions feel unnecessary, even exhausting to them? To answer this, we must explore another key concept in Schopenhauer's philosophy: the distinction between solitude and loneliness. In his view, loneliness is a condition that arises from a lack of fulfillment, while solitude is a state of self sufficiency. The majority of people fear being alone because they associate it with emotional emptiness. But an intelligent mind does not experience solitude in the same way. In fact, shop and how I believe that solitude is not only beneficial but essential for those who seek wisdom, self reflection, and personal growth. Let's take a moment to reflect on this. Have you ever been surrounded by people, yet felt completely disconnected from them? Have you ever engaged in a conversation only to realize that it holds no real meaning? This is precisely the feeling that Schopenhauer described: the awareness that much of social life is built on superficiality rather than true intellectual or emotional connection. In many ways, society conditions us to believe that being alone is unnatural, that isolation is something to be avoided at all costs. But Schopenhauer saw things differently. He argued that solitude allows for the deepest forms of thought and creativity, while constant socialization prevents true introspection. He wrote, "I love you. He will not love freedom." for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. This idea is profound. It suggests that the need for social interaction is often a form of dependency and inability to be alone with one's own thoughts. The intelligent person, however, does not fear solitude. They embrace it because it grants them the freedom to think, to create, and to understand themselves without external influence. Consider some of the greatest minds in history. Many of them lived in deliberate isolation, not because they were incapable of socializing, but because they found deeper fulfillment in solitude. Isaac Newton spent years alone while developing his theories of motion and gravity. Nikola Tesla chose to remain single and dedicated his entire life to his work. Emily Dickinson rarely left her home. Yet she produced some of the most profound poetry ever written. These individuals were not lonely, they were immersed in the richness of their own minds. But there is another reason why intelligent people often distance themselves from social life, one that goes beyond mere preference. Schopenhauer observed that most human interactions are driven not by a genuine exchange of ideas but by social expectations, ego, and even hidden competition. He believed that in social settings, people often seek validation rather than truth, and this can be deeply frustrating for those who value intellectual honesty. Think about this in your own life. How many conversations do you have that feel truly meaningful? How often do you encounter people who are more interested in listening than in speaking? For highly intelligent individuals, these shallow interactions can feel like a waste of time. They see through the masks that people wear, the way individuals adjust their personalities to fit social norms, the way they avoid deep discussions in favor of small talk, the way they seek approval rather than truth. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence naturally leads to a heightened awareness of these social dynamics, and the more a person becomes aware of them, the less they are willing to participate in them. He observed that intelligent individuals often struggle to find people who truly understand them, not because they are arrogant, but because their way of thinking is simply different. They see the world through a lens that most people do not, and as a result, they often feel like outsiders. But this raises a difficult question. If social life is so often filled with superficiality, should highly intelligent people isolate themselves completely? Is there any value in human relationships at all? Schopenhauer had a nuanced answer to this. He did not believe that all social interactions are meaningless, only that most of them are. He suggested that the key is selectivity. Intelligent individuals should not avoid social life entirely, but they should be highly deliberate about who they spend their time with. He advised seeking out relationships based on genuine intellectual and emotional connection rather than social obligation. He also made an important distinction between different types of solitude. There is solitude that leads to growth and reflection, and there is solitude that stems from bitterness or alienation. The former is healthy, while the latter can become destructive. Schopenhauer warned against allowing intellectual superiority to turn into contempt for others. He believed that true wisdom comes from understanding the nature of society while still maintaining a sense of detachment. So, how can intelligent individuals navigate this balance? How can they embrace solitude without becoming completely disconnected from the world? The answer lies in the final and most powerful insight from Schopenhauer, one that reveals the ultimate reason why smart people don't care about social life and what they do. Instead, Schopenhauer's philosophy leads us to a striking realization, one that many intelligent individuals come to on their own, whether consciously or unconsciously. It is not that they outright reject society, nor that they lack the ability to engage in social life. Rather, They recognize a fundamental truth: most human interactions are not based on substance but on necessity, habit, and social conditioning. This realization changes everything. If most people engage in social life not because they truly desire deep connections, but because they fear solitude, then what does this say about the nature of human relationships? Schopenhauer believed that much of what people call friendship or companionship is often rooted in mutual need rather than genuine connection. This is a concept that can be difficult to accept because it challenges one of our most deeply ingrained beliefs that relationships are inherently valuable. But Schopenhauer forces us to ask, are they really, or do we simply seek them out to avoid confronting ourselves? He argued that most friendships are transactional in nature. People befriend others not necessarily because they deeply connect with them, but because of shared circumstances, work, school convenience. When these circumstances change, the connection often fades. This is why so many friendships dissolve over time. The bond was never truly about mutual understanding, it was about external factors that no longer exist. Intelligent individuals see this pattern and, as a result, become more selective with their relationships. They do not invest in connections that lack depth or authenticity. This perspective is not cynical, it is liberating. When you stop seeking validation from social life, you become free to build relationships based on genuine alignment rather than social obligation. Schopenhauer himself was highly skeptical of the idea that being well liked or socially successful was a sign of intelligence or personal fulfillment. He noted that the most profound thinkers in history were often isolated not because they were rejected by society, but because they chose a different path. Take, for example, Leonardo da Vinci. He was known to be deeply introspective, preferring the solitude of his studies to the distractions of social gatherings. His mind was consumed with ideas, inventions, and an endless pursuit of knowledge. He saw social interaction as a potential diversion from his true purpose. The same was true for Nikola Tesla, who famously said that he never married because he believed relationships would interfere with his work. These individuals were not lonely, they were consumed by something greater than socializing. But what is it that intelligent people seek, if not social validation? The answer lies in something Schopenhauer valued above all else: wisdom. He believed that the highest form of existence was one dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and self mastery. For those who think deeply, time spent in contemplation is far more valuable than time spent in idle conversation. They are not interested in being popular or socially dominant, they are interested in understanding reality at a deeper level. This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy takes an even more radical turn. He suggested that true wisdom requires a form of detachment, not only from social life, but from the illusions that most people live by. To him, the average person is caught in a cycle of endless distractions, chasing status, approval, entertainment, without ever questioning why. Intelligent individuals, on the other hand, naturally distance themselves from these things because they see them for what they are: temporary and often meaningless. Consider how much of social life revolves around performance. People carefully curate their identities, filtering what they say and how they present themselves to fit into societal norms. There is an unspoken pressure to conform, to be agreeable, to maintain appearances, to avoid uncomfortable truths. But for those who see through, this participation in such a system feels exhausting. Schopenhauer described this as the burden of clarity. The more you understand, the less you are able to tolerate illusions. This does not mean that intelligent people never engage in social life. Rather, they approach it with a different mindset. They are not attached to it, nor do they define. They see it as something that can be useful at times, but unnecessary for their deeper fulfillment. This is why so many intellectuals prefer small, meaningful conversations over large gatherings. It is why they gravitate toward people who challenge them intellectually rather than those who simply provide companionship. But here lies the greatest paradox. While intelligent individuals often withdraw from social life, they are also the ones most capable of understanding human nature at its deepest level. Their solitude is not a rejection of humanity, it is an attempt to understand it from a clearer perspective. Schopenhauer himself believed that wisdom comes from observing life without being fully immersed in it. Only by stepping back can one see the full picture. This idea challenges everything we are taught about the importance of social life. If deep thinking naturally leads to solitude, then perhaps the true measure of intelligence is not social success, but the ability to be alone without feeling incomplete. This is a concept that modern society struggles to accept because it contradicts the belief that social connection is the highest form of fulfillment. But Schopenhauer forces us to ask, is it really, or have we been conditioned to believe that because solitude is uncomfortable for most people? As we approach the final and most powerful insight from Schopenhauer, we must confront the ultimate question. If intelligent individuals do not care about social life, then what do they value above all else? And how can this realization transform the way we approach our own lives? The final revelation will be the most profound of all. If intelligent individuals do not place great importance on social life, then what do they value above all else? What is it that gives their lives meaning, if not the approval, companionship, or validation of others? Schopenhauer's ultimate insight is both profound and unsettling. The highest form of fulfillment comes not from external sources but from within. He argued that those who seek happiness through social life are often chasing a fleeting illusion, while those who cultivate inner depth knowledge and self mastery attain something far more enduring. At the core of his philosophy is the idea that human suffering arises from desires are endless, craving for recognition, pleasure, and distraction. Most people, he observed, spend their lives in a state of restless pursuit. They seek relationships, status, and entertainment, believing that these things will bring them happiness. But even when they achieve what they desire, the satisfaction is temporary. Soon a new craving emerges and the cycle begins again. Intelligent individuals, however, are more likely to see through this illusion. They recognize that true contentment cannot be found in external validation, but in a life aligned with deeper purpose and understanding. This is why they often withdraw from superficial social interactions. It is not that they despise people, it is that they refuse to engage in distractions that take them away from their true pursuits. This realization is life changing because it forces us to ask, what if everything we have been taught about fulfillment is wrong? What if happiness does not come from being surrounded by others, but from developing our own minds and souls? Schopenhauer believed that the most intelligent people do not fear solitude because they have learned to be at peace with themselves. Instead of seeking external stimulation, they cultivate inner richness. They read, they reflect, they create, they pursue knowledge, not because it makes them socially admired, but because it is an end in itself. He wrote, the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In other words, those who are deeply intelligent and introspective do not see life in simplistic surface level terms. They question, they analyze, they search for meaning, and because of this, they often feel disconnected from mainstream society, which tends to avoid deep existential questions. But here is where Schopenhauer makes his most powerful argument. Solitude is not merely a preference, it is a requirement for those who seek true wisdom. He warned that being surrounded by the noise of society can prevent an individual from developing independent thought. the expectations of others, the pressures to conform, the constant distractions, all of these things pull people away from the most important journey they can take, the journey inward. For this reason, he saw solitude not as isolation but as a form of liberation. He believed that the greatest minds in history reached their potential not by immersing themselves in social life but by stepping away from it, by detaching from the ordinary concerns of society. They were able to see reality more clearly and devote themselves to higher pursuits. This challenges everything modern culture tells us about social life. We are constantly encouraged to network, to build relationships, to avoid being alone. But Schopenhauer forces us to reconsider. Is this truly necessary, or have we simply been conditioned to believe that because society fears solitude? If we look at history, we see that many of the most remarkable thinkers, artists, and inventors lived in a state of partial or complete withdrawal from mainstream life. They were not interested in casual socialization or mindless entertainment. They were consumed by something greater, their ideas, their work, their search for meaning. But does this mean that social life has no value at all? Schopenhauer did not go that far. He acknowledged that human relationships can be meaningful, but only when they are built on genuine intellectual or emotional depth. He warned against surrounding oneself with people simply for the sake of avoiding loneliness. He argued that if one must choose between superficial company and solitude, solitude is always the better option. So, where does this leave us? Should we abandon social life entirely? Not necessarily, but Schopenhauer's insights offer a radical shift in perspective. Instead of seeking fulfillment through others, we must first find it within ourselves. Instead of fearing solitude, we should embrace it as a tool for growth and self discovery. Instead of chasing social validation, we should pursue knowledge, wisdom, and personal excellence. This is the ultimate realization. Highly intelligent people do not care about social life because they have discovered something far more valuable, their ability to think independently, to create freely, and to exist without the need for constant external validation. They understand that true fulfillment is not found in the presence of others, but in the cultivation of the self. So now the question turns to you. What would your life look like if you embrace solitude as a strength instead of a weakness? If you stopped seeking external validation and focused instead on your own growth, how much more could you achieve? Perhaps the greatest minds in history were not outliers, but pioneers. And perhaps the path they walked, the path of introspection, independence, and intellectual freedom, is the very path that leads to the deepest form of fulfillment. Thanks for looking. Subscribe for more.